It wasn't programmed to harm the crew.
Dead by Daylight has had its fair share of bad metas. We've seen Ruin and Undying, DS and Unbreakable, Eruption and Call of Brine, Dead Man's Switch and Pain Res, and so many more. While all these were extremely strong, I would argue that none of them caused an uproar like the perk I will be talking about today. We're going to discuss why Dead by Daylight's player base was not made for this. Do you get it? Come on, you got the joke. It was really clever, I know. It's like the perk is called... Yeah, come on. Anyways, on June 13th, 2023, we saw the release of the End Transmission chapter. And with that came the Singularity with his 3 unique perks, and the Survivor, Gabriel Soma, along with his 3 unique perks. While the Singularity's perks were received with mild interest, Gabriel's were extremely controversial. Let's start by discussing Troubleshooter. Out of all of Gabriel's perks, this is the one that was received the best. Troubleshooter activated when you were in a chase. While in chase, if you dropped a pallet, you could see the killer's order for the next 6 seconds. The generator with the highest progress had its order revealed to you while you were being chased, meaning this would help you keep the killer far away from your teammates who are doing the generator. This is a nice information perk that I consider a bit underrated. Occasionally you'll see this perk make its way into a chase build. Personally speaking, I think this perk will become much better when the PTB changes to Quick Gambit come through. Utilizing the knowledge of where to avoid and chase, as well as being able to read the killer's mind games for 6 seconds due to aura reading, will give you a lot of value. So I can see this perk making its way into more builds following this upcoming PTB. Gabriel's next perk got a lot of attention on the PTB, and that perk is Scavenger. Content creators at this time spoke out about the perk. Reddit posts were made about it. The way Scavenger worked on this PTB was that you would use a toolbox on a generator, you would need to hit 4 great skill checks, and then the toolbox would be back at full charges, giving you essentially a built-to-last toolbox with no time invested in it. People were convinced that this perk allowed a toolbox of any strength to be fully replenished, which it did, anything from a worn-out toolbox to an engineer's toolbox, and of course, the most common and powerful item, the commodious toolbox, with a wire spool and socket swivel attached. This was the major issue, that generators would be completed incredibly fast with this perk. And the whole time this perk was being focused on, the Dead by Daylight player base didn't realize what was waiting for them on the other side. Before I move on, I just want to tell you guys that in the description below, you'll find a link to an Oddstarva video about Scavenger when it was on the PTB, if you're curious about how strong it was. I didn't want to talk about it long because this video is not about Scavenger, but it felt wrong if I didn't bring it up in the history of the perk we're about to talk about. I briefly checked Reddit to see if people had talked about Made for this on the PTB, and while there was a bit of discussion, it definitely seemed that Scavenger was the main discussion point. And from my memory as well, I don't recall hearing much about MFT until the perk was on the live servers. I went to the patch notes that were posted on DBD's subreddit about the In Transmission chapter, and there were genuinely no comments about Made for this, more about the Singularity. A reminder for everyone who may have forgotten what we had at this point. Made for this gave a survivor 3% haste whenever they were injured and not exhausted. That'll be important later. Also, survivors could pick a survivor up from the dying state to give themselves 10 seconds of endurance to protect themselves from going down, which is a strong effect on its own that could have been its own perk. Using Made for this had its ups and downs for survivors. Staying injured is rarely the correct play for most killers. Legion and Plague is the only time when you either have to stay injured or should stay injured. With MFT, there was no reason to heal, due to just how fast you were. You were a real problem, I guess you could say, if I'm being nice, in chase. Killers almost had to rely on Bloodlust to catch survivors around certain tiles, and killers who didn't often get Bloodlust, like Doctor and Skull Merchant, catching survivors could be a real pain, due to you effectively taking a 3% speed debuff. Not only this, but MFT is what I like to call a quiet perk. A quiet perk is something that you cannot be 100% sure that the other player has. While in a chase, the only way to properly tell was through the game sense that took hundreds to thousands of hours to cultivate by knowing just exactly how many loops a survivor can get on a certain tile. With Made for This, if the survivor and killer both played perfectly, the survivor would still get an extra loop on the tile, simply due to them being able to outrun the killer. Why did this perk have no visual giveaway? Every exhaustion perk has some visual show. Dead hard, there's a big dash. Sprint burst, they're sprinting very fast. Balanced landing, no grunt when they hit the ground. Lithe, they go through a window and they go very fast. Overcome, the distance gained off hit is much further. Even Iron Will has an audio cue. During this meta, you simply had to assume that a survivor had the perk, which was very similar to another survivor perk that was meta for years, Dead Hard. This perk led to killers making mistakes. No matter how experienced you were, you had to relearn the speed of survivors, meaning that killers were whiffing attacks a lot more because survivors outran the lunge range, which, on one hand, is exciting to learn something new. But on the other hand, it's real miserable to barely miss out on ending a chase because the Meg simply holds W and she outruns your lunge by just a little bit. Quite frankly though, and I guess fortunately depending on how you feel about it, strong killers like Nurse and Blight didn't struggle against the perk at all due to how fast they could catch up to a survivor and then down them. Nurse could, and still can, literally teleport onto someone and down them immediately. Blight could hit you and then rush after you and down you instantly. This issue is as old as Dead by Daylight itself, where low-tier killers are hit harder than the high tiers are. Killers like Freddy, Trapper, Myers, Ghostface, and Doctor were brutalized by the perk. While Ghostface could ignore the perk a bit, if a survivor spotted you coming, you were just powerless. You'd have to catch up to a survivor very slowly. But this is hardly an MFT issue. A lot of survivor perks hit the weaker killers especially hard. Things like DS, Dead Hard, Off the Record, Lithe, and Sprint Burst, and so many more are brutal to these low-tier killers who just have to catch up to a survivor after they hit them. Well, say that you injure a survivor while you're doing your Doctor daily, and then you finally catch up to them after they've been doing incredibly well in chase with MFT, and then boom, there it is. The survivor dead hards and forces the chase to continue. Yes, if you paid close attention earlier, then you had heard that Made for This didn't cause exhaustion. It just couldn't be used while exhausted, much like Iron Will. Made for This could be paired with an exhaustion perk. Theoretically, you could pair the perk with something like Lithe or Balanced Landing, but it was best used with Dead Hard. So to catch everyone up here, you have Made for This to extend chases on every loop. Once the killer catches up, you could Dead Hard too. A lot of things you'd see is the pairing of Resilience with MFT to not only cause the survivor to move faster, but to also give them increased vault speed. This combo was downright miserable for killer. I remember having matches where I was certain there was nothing I could do to bring the match back. With every loop being made much more difficult, and so many loops on the map, a normal N1 killer was truly suffering. Now, what I'm sure most of you who played at this time have been waiting for, Made for This and Hope. This, I think, was the most ridiculous combo of perks a survivor has ever been able to use. Stronger than DS and Unbreakable, stronger than For the People and Buckle Up, stronger than all of it. If the survivors made it to the endgame, you were not catching them. It was just that simple. If you're unaware of what these perks do, Hope gives a survivor a 7% haste buff, and MFT gave a 3% haste buff, meaning the survivor moved at 110 movement speed, which is as fast as the Hag, the Huntress, the Deathslinger, the Spirit, and at that time the Trickster. Just a side note before somebody puts in the comments, I do know Chucky's 110% movement speed, but he wasn't released at the time of MFT. At the time that Made for This was in the meta. So yes, a survivor could run just as fast as you if you played certain killers. It was genuinely one of the worst things that you could feel as killer. That feeling when you're chasing a survivor in the endgame and you know you just can't catch them, yeah, that sucks, doesn't it? Well, it was amplified so much more by this combination. It was everywhere, from the release of In Transmission till the day the perk was nerfed, which is my birthday, by the way. You would see multiple MFTs a game, nearly every game. Never before has a perk shown up and dominated the meta like Made for This. Even perks like Decisive Strike weren't as impactful, because Decisive Strike required you to at least wiggle some before it could be used, while Made for This only required you to get hit. Following its nerf on November 28th, with the release of The Good Guy, we saw Made for This practically disappear from the meta immediately, and while it was satisfying to see the perk finally leave, it is a bit of a shame, because it was nice to see something new break into the meta. Made for This was ludicrously strong, but what if the nerf was a bit different? What if the haste effect was lowered, or the endurance effect was removed? It's a shame that in Dead by Daylight, we see these new super strong meta perks appear and then be nerfed completely into the ground, instead of finding a nice middle ground. We've seen this recently happen to the Skull Merchant. But maybe one day we can take another look at Made for this and give it a nice little change to give it a spot in the Survivor perk pool while not giving it all the buffs it had originally. Or did Made for this have its time in the sun and now it's time to see it out, leave it in the proverbial C tier of Survivor perks, and move on from the perk? We'll have to wait until the future to see exactly what behavior has in mind for the future of MFT. Either way, the perk has proven that Dead by Daylight was indeed not made for this. Did you get it? Did you get it this time? Guys, come on. I worked hard on that one. I know. That was a real good joke. Well, that's the video. I hope you all enjoyed looking back at the Made for this meta with me. Personally speaking, I do remember using MFT quite a bit and having fun with it due to just how fast you felt. It did help to freshen up Survivor gameplay, especially for a role that doesn't often get new strong perks. However, I do think it was objectively way stronger than it should have been. But yeah, please do like the video if you enjoyed. For you guys it's just a button, but for me it helps out so much. Subscribe if you're interested in me and my content. I have quite a big catalog of videos you can watch at this point. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think of MFT. I stream on Twitch every morning during weekdays. My name is Kuhssir, and I will hopefully see you next time. Bye bye.